Wilfred Bion. In our journey of FAQ psychoanalysis, we take up FAQs on Wilfred Bion. Wilfred Bion is among the most enigmatic and esoteric of psychoanalytic writers. Very difficult to read in the original to start with. Bion is also a person who is rare in psychoanalysis, in that he had a very wide and very intense real-life experience. Most of psychoanalytic thinkers suffer from what I call BA, MA, PhD syndrome. People who have always been in academics, graduated, post-graduated, doctorate, and started practicing whatever they were taught without going out into the real world, the hard world of business, politics, administration, army, police, where you really get in touch with the hard and variety part of human life. Wilfred Bion served in the army. He was born in India at Mathura when Britishers used to rule over India, imperial times. Wilfred's father used to serve the British Empire and he was posted in India. Bion was born in India, looked after by Indian nannies, had an inadequate and a difficult mother, and that created a deep-rooted trauma in him. Wilfred Bion, to use someone else's phrase, was a deeply traumatized person. At the same time, the strong and healthy part of his personality, his mind, was also very strong and robust. And this enabled him to look at deep-seated trauma in an autobiographical sense at very close quarters. Wilfred Bion was trying to heal himself of the traumatic things which happened to him with his mother, especially, largely with both the parents, but especially the mother. And he was also trying to heal trauma of his experiences as an army man. In one of the difficult tank battles, his unit was asked to attack, and he knew it was a suicidal order, a suicidal attack, and he saw many of his comrades die, many of them wounded for life, and he saw human behavior under such severe stress. And of course, he himself got severely stressed, but he was a brave man. He got awarded with Iron Cross. He was almost to get a Victoria Cross, which he self-sabotaged in a way. Bion started off first as an army man, then as a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist looking at army hospitals, the mental health aspect of it. So he was in the army hospital as a psychiatrist, trying to heal soldiers who were coming back traumatized from the battlefield so they can be made healthy and sent again to the battlefield. Bion's experiences as a psychiatrist with returning soldiers, returning with trauma, today we would call it as PTSD, and his experiences with his parents, especially mother, and his experiences in the army in India. These three gave him a lot of real life experience, which other psychoanalysts did not so much have. And this gave Bion a very strong sense of pragmatism and acceptance of what is in front of him and not trying to interpret it away in terms of existing theoretical concepts. Bion therefore was able to see aspects, events, entities encountered in real life far better than other psychoanalysts, most of whom had this BA, MA, PhD problem without any real life experience of the hard life, the varied life, strange life. Bion started off as a Kleinian. He underwent analysis twice, first with a Freudian analyst, then with a Kleinian analyst. Bion started off as a Kleinian, rose to become the director of the Tavistock Clinic, and then he could not limit himself to conventional Kleinian concepts. So he started going beyond that, and at some point he crossed the line of mysticism. And that is where he had to separate from classical Kleinian community and go on his own. In Bion's evolution, we see two different Bions, the early Bion and the late Bion. In fact, three Bions we can see, four Bions. The army psychiatrist group Bion, who is experimenting with groups because so many soldiers had to be treated. One-on-one treatment was just not possible in terms of sheer numbers of patients. So they had to be treated in groups so that they could be sent back to the battlefield in groups. It was a game of numbers. So we see in Bion four distinct phases. First phase, Bion as an army psychiatrist dealing with groups of soldiers, from which came out working with groups. A very classic book from Bion, working with groups. First Bion, the army psychiatrist Bion working with groups of soldiers. Second Bion was the Tavistock Bion. The Tavistock Bion working within the Kleinian framework, rising up as he expanded the Kleinian framework. The third Bion was what I would really call the early Bion, as Bion was coming on to his own, which was the Bion of K and minus K, knowledge and hate. The Bion of grid, who created the grid. And then the last Bion, the Bion who was a Bion of O, the ineffable O. So we see the four different Bion moving from psychiatry and groups to psychoanalysis and Klein to developing one's own grid, very distinct from a Kleinian approach, and then going to the mystical O. The late Bion, the last one, is almost like a mistake. That is not to say that the mistakes are wrong or unscientific. It is just that it is a science of future. Wilfred Bion, like Melanie Klein, and also like Jung, saw very disturbed, severely disturbed patients. His patients were more on the psychotic spectrum than on the neurotic spectrum. And one great thing that Bion did, although he could not do it very successfully, was bring in epistemology into psychoanalysis. Later, Lacan brought in philosophy. Bion, much before Lacan, brought in epistemology, one part of philosophy. So in that sense, Bion was one of the, not one of the, he was actually the first to bring philosophy into psychoanalysis. And the part of philosophy he brought into psychoanalysis was epistemology. Lacan brought in philosophy, but he brought in Hegel and Marx, Hegel, Marx and Kant. But he did not bring in much of epistemology. Bion's effort at bringing in epistemology is a very correct effort. I feel we need to integrate epistemology into psychoanalysis, and I have done it in my model of the mind, which I call HEAT. And I have essentially used Immanuel Kant's epistemological model and added a few things to it and put that epistemological model into psychoanalysis. So first, who was Wilfred Bion? He was a psychoanalyst who has created a Bionian school, and it's a very good school. I would recommend anybody who wants to go after Freud somewhere. I would suggest start with Freud, go to Klein, and then go to Bion. And spend a lot of time with Bion. In my experience of psychoanalysis, the Bionian school and the Jungian school are among the most open of schools. You don't see much of fanaticism, which you see otherwise very clearly in the Freudian school, the Kleinian school, the Winnicottian school, ironically called the independent school, and yet so fanatical about itself. And the last of it, ISTDP. So such a new school and yet so fanatical about oneself. Question 2, what are the major works of Wilfred Bion? Some of his popular books are first, A Memoir of Future, Experiences in Groups, Elements of Psychoanalysis, Taming Wild Thoughts, Cogitations, War Memoirs, many of his papers. Symington's biography is a very good biography of Wilfred Bion. What are the concepts he contributed to psychoanalysis? Wilfred Bion contributed many original concepts. It's difficult to give a short answer, but a short answer would be this. Attacks on linking, alpha and beta elements, alpha and beta function, the grid which involves love, hate, knowledge, and avoidance of knowledge minus K, the container and the content, and the dynamics in the psychoanalytic groups. These are some of the, and of course, the ineffable O. How can I forget that? It should have been mentioned here, the ineffable O. 4. Did Wilfred Bion take psychoanalysis twice? Yes, he did. He first had a Freudian analysis with a Freudian analyst, and then a Kleinian analysis with a Kleinian analyst. What is the grid and the language created by Bion to bring in exactness in psychoanalysis. Wilfred Bion felt that the language of psychoanalysis was very amorphous, approximate, and inaccurate. It was not exact and precise. To bring in the accuracy, exactness, and precision, Wilfred Bion created a language of notations. Say, for example, K would stand for knowledge, minus K, avoidance of knowledge, L for love, H for hate. And he would use this kind of notations and put them in a grid, which is a famous Bion's grid, which can help one analyze the personality, the pathology, and the intensity of the patient's difficulties. Also understand how the therapy session is moving in terms of the grid and try to figure out which best path to take in the interest of the patient through the use of a grid. Later on, Bion felt the grid was inadequate and he stopped using the grid so much. But initially, he was very fond of grid and he thought he was bringing in exactness into psychoanalysis. 6. What are alpha and beta elements? Wilfred Bion brings in epistemology into psychoanalysis, and unknowingly he brings in Immanuel Kant's epistemological sequence. Kant talks about stimuli incident upon a person and my senses sense it. So if I see this, my eyes tell me what is the visual part of it. The tactile touch tells me what it is like. If there is some sound, I can see it. If there is some fragrance, I can smell it. So all the senses report to me some stimuli from here. Each sense will report that stimulus for which that particular sense is built. And all the stimuli will be put together by the brain. And I get an image that what I see in front is this. So you have Immanuel Kant who says stimulus comes from outside, collected by the senses. And when stimulus related to one particular entity, the stimuli is coming from 5 different senses. But when this stimuli related to one entity, recorded differently by 5 different senses come together, you get a sensation about a particular product. And then you move from sensation to conception to knowledge to wisdom. This line of Immanuel Kant, if you look at it from one point of view, you see the stimuli getting processed sequentially. Unknowingly, Bion used this aspect, this processing aspect of Immanuel Kant's epistemological sequence without using the full sequence. And Wilfred Bion talks about 2 kinds of elements, alpha elements and beta elements. Alpha elements are those which have been worked upon by the mind and are ready to be used by the conscious mind or in dreams. Whereas beta elements are those unprocessed elements on which processing is yet to be done and they are still not ready to be used by either the conscious mind or by the fantasy. And therefore they get into projection, projective identification. So Bion talked about 2 kinds of psychic entities, those entities that can be processed by the conscious mind or by the dreaming mind, called the alpha elements, and those elements which are yet to be processed enough so that they can be taken up by the conscious mind or the dreaming mind, called the beta elements. And Bion talked about alpha function, that function of the mind which works on the beta element to convert them into alpha elements. So alpha function is that psychic function which acts upon the raw unprocessed beta elements to convert them into processed alpha elements so that they can be used up for dreaming or for the conscious mind. Health therefore depends upon having minimum amount of beta elements. The more the beta elements, less integrated the personality would be, less healthy the personality would be. One way of looking at Klein and Bion together is to say if the split is open, more beta elements and more difficult beta elements would be generated. Wilfred Bion does not go into the qualitative classification of beta elements, whether you have small beta elements and big beta elements, soft beta elements and intense beta elements, same with the alpha. He does not go into the qualitative heterogeneity of the beta and the alpha elements. He just uses a broad category. Of course, in the category, there would be a continuum, but Bion does not go into that continuum. 7, what is the alpha function? We have done it. 8, what is L, H, K, and minus K? Bion started using these exact notations. So L stands for love, H for hate, K for knowledge, and minus K for avoidance of knowledge. Bion felt that often in therapy, the love between the two heals, whereas hate destroys the process. And in psychosis or extreme difficulties, real knowledge is actively avoided. And therefore, K is not allowed, but minus K is at work. Similarly, H, hate, is often at work, which does not allow internalization of a good enough stable object. So the work of therapy is helped by L and K, and it is opposed by H and minus K. Therefore, the goal of therapy is to maximize L and K and minimize H and minus K. Of course, these are not the only goals of therapy, but some of the goals of therapy. 9, what is O? Later, Bion went mystical and went to the idea of O. And this idea was something which was mystical because Bion said O is not something that can be completely defined. It is ineffable, the ineffable O. It also cannot be directly experienced or known, but its effects can be felt. Its effects can be felt. Sorry. So O was that event whose effects would be felt, but which cannot be directly known. It has a transcendental quality to it. And this transcendental quality is not coming into psychoanalysis for the first time. Jung had this concept of self, which had the transcendental quality. And after Bion, Kohut had the concept of the self, which also had this non-definitional definition escaping transcendental quality to itself. There is one difference between Immanuel Kant's unknowable thing in itself and Bion's ineffable O. The thing in itself is outside, the O is inside or in the therapy room. In that sense, the unknowable O is far nearer than Immanuel Kant's thing in itself. But one element is common, both of them can never be known fully. Secondly, because the thinking itself usually involves operation of senses, O in one sense can directly be experienced inside without the use of all the senses. So the deployment of senses in Kant's comprehension of the unknowable, the thinking itself, is very different compared to the deployment of senses in case of the ineffable O. Common thing would be both are unknowable. The ineffable O, and I have elaborated quite on this. One of my lectures is titled Home of O. Where do you locate O structurally and functionally? What is O and where do you locate it? And one way to look at O is to look at O as the height, the final height of containment. Then there is something called passive containment, where you just contain difficult feelings. Then there is active containment, where you process those contained feelings and take in negative, hold it, and give back the positive. And then the third stage of that containment process is where not only you process and give back, but things come into you. They just get healed, and the healing is transmitted to that person. The height of containment. So one way of looking at O is that state where the healing happens. And to look at it in a process way is to say that something comes from the patient, it gets into you, into the state of O. And there the healing happens and the healing goes back to the person. The person is healed. 10. How does the mind grow? How does healing happen? In Bion's view, mind grows by exposure to truth. Bion is far more cognitive and epistemological compared to other psychoanalysts who are more leaning towards affect. Bion is among the most cognitive of psychoanalytic thinkers. For him, the crisis of psychosis essentially is a cognitive crisis, not it's a cognitive crisis, it's an epistemological crisis. But when we say cognitive in Bion's terms, it's very different from what goes on in cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. And for that, we have to differentiate the different kinds of thoughts. The thoughts involved in the symptom, the thoughts involved in the core beliefs, and the thoughts involved in evaluative function in any phenomena. And the thoughts which are involved in allowing or not allowing right knowledge to come in, or the thoughts which are involved in generating love or hate. So thoughts in the Bionian context are very different from thoughts that we usually talk of in the cognitive therapy context. But that notwithstanding, if we take thought as a generic category, then Bion is among the most thought-oriented psychoanalytic thinkers, not so much drawn to affect as other psychoanalytic thinkers are. How does healing happen? Initially, Bion used to follow the classical psychoanalytic line, make the unconscious conscious, release the affect in catharsis by revisiting the traumatic events. So revisit the traumatic events, make the ideational component unconscious to conscious, and release the unconscious affect blocked in the traumatic event through catharsis. This was the classical Bionian approach, like any other psychoanalytic therapist would do. Later on, Bion started conceptualizing healing in different ways. First was the growth of K and the growth of L. Reduction in minus K, reduction in H. Later on, the management of envy. When he went to the attacks on linking, it was healing of envy. And Lastly, he came to the ineffable O. So, how healing happens, Bion's conceptualization of how healing happens went on a change. As a military, as an army psychiatrist, he was looking at shifting the group from basic assumptions group to the work group, and that was healing. As a Kleinian analyst, it was closing the split, attaining the depressive position. After that, dealing with envy to prevent attacks on linking, and enhancing K and L and minimizing minus K and H. And lastly, it was ineffable O. So Bion's conceptualization of how healing happens undergoes a change in the 4 phases of Bion. Last, of course, was healing happens in the ineffable O. 11. What is transformation? Now, this is something very fundamental because Bion addresses three very important concepts which others have not addressed in psychoanalysis. First, the concept of transformation. Second, the concept of epistemology in psychoanalysis. Third, the concept of O. And fourth, the concept of K and L. These concepts are not addressed adequately in other schools, but Bion gives a very good addressal to this. So if I was to recap, I lost the link in between. Bion deals with the concept of transformation, frustration, infinity, linking, epistemology, love and hate, knowledge and avoidance of knowledge. These 7 concepts others are not dealing with, and my favorites are infinity, frustration, and O. These are very mystical concepts. Some of them, third one is a mystical concept. Frustration and infinity have escaped attention, and they are very much at work in deep-rooted psychoanalytic work. So the concept of frustration, the concept of infinity, the concept of O, which is mystical, and then of course other concepts of Bion, which I listed out to create a list of 7. They are all very important Bionian concepts. One of the important concepts is transformation. Transformation is, of course, you go into a systematic understanding of how you transform from state 1 to 2, and if 2 is healing, then you are rephrasing the question to say, how does healing happen? Because healing is one particular kind of transformation. There can be many kinds of transformation, not necessarily ending in healing, but healing is one particular type of transformation. And it is interesting from a systems point of view to understand what is the force field and how does it operate for transformation as a phenomena, and specifically in case of healing. And Bion has written a very good book on this. Those who are interested can go into it. One of the very good elements in it is he says the interpretation is accepted and the premise is rejected. The patient agrees with everything, does everything, but no change happens. And transformation involves both intrapsychic and interpersonal dynamics. It is yet to be fully understood. Bion started it off. It remains to be developed further. Nobody has taken it up because it's very difficult to conceptualize conceptually the force field of healing. What all heals? And on this, I have two lectures. One is titled Transformation, and second is What is Healing? 12. According to Bion, which elements take part in projective identification? It is the beta elements, the raw elements yet to be processed and converted into alpha elements. 13. What is meant by container and the contained? This is another very important concept of Bion I forgot to mention. The concept of container and the contained. Similarly, attacks on linking. We'll take it up later. But for the present, container and the contained. Bion says that the infant cannot hold, accept, or contain or deal with difficult affects arising in his system. And therefore, he puts those affects, those confusions, that perplexity into the mother. And the mother holds those difficult feelings, does not disintegrate, does not dysregulate, is able to successfully contain it and process those things and give back the child a smile. So the child shows aggression, he may beat the mother, but the mother in turn gives back a smile. So she takes in aggression, gives back love. This is a very important function. Bion says we all need containers at every part of our life. Whenever we are not able to contain successfully affects which are generated in us, we go disintegrated, dysregulated. And at that point, we require somebody else to contain us. And the therapist has to play this very important role, that he has to be a very good container. And the containing function is a very important function. And if a child does not see that his parents are good containers, he does not develop the containing function in himself. And as an adult, he can neither contain his own affects, nor he can be a good container to others. So any difficult stimuli comes in, the person erupts. It is like if a baby cries and the mother shouts at the baby. She is not able to contain the difficult emotion arising in her because of the stimulus of the crying. And this leads to how much stress you can take as an adult individual. People with very big containers, it's like a bucket, that we have 5-liter container for anger, 4-liter container for envy, 3-liter container for greed, and so on. So if the containers are big enough and if the containers are empty enough, even if negative affect is generated, you still have containing capacity to contain it. But if the containers are overflowing or they are very small, then once the overflow starts, the overflowing affect will generate symptoms in the mental health domain or create a psychosomatic sickness. It is necessary, therefore, to keep our containers as empty as possible and develop the emotional muscles and thereby increase the capacity of our containers so that we can provide containment function to others, contain our own affect, and not have overflowing affect which creates pathology. The containing function can be looked at 3 levels. First, the passive containing of the affect. Second, active containing of the affect, processing the affect and giving it back to the person. Take in the negative. In the first case, passive containing, just take in the negative and just keep it, and then your function, your system sanitizes it, neutralizes it. Second case, take in the negative, hold it, convert it to positive and give it back. It is active containing. And third is take in get into the state of O, allow healing to happen and allow healing to go back to the first. The highest of containing is to get into the state of O. 14. What did Bion contribute to group therapy? Bion was one of the pioneers in group therapy. And after him, we see only Yalom, but apart from that, we don't see many people in group therapy area. It's something we really have to work, because group therapy is very important for countries like all developing countries where population is huge, number of therapists is low, and the paying capacity for individual therapy does not exist in 80% of the population. So group therapy, which can be cheaper per capita and where you can overcome the capacity constraints of mental health sector, has to be taken up. Bion was a pioneer in group therapy. And we are moving here from micro to the macro, which is always a danger zone in psychoanalysis. Bion looks at the group as a group which goes into two states. When the group is behaving, well, all the members of the group are behaving rationally, focused on the task given to the group. The group is in a state that Bion calls the work group. Work group means it is a state into which a group is, where the group is focused on the task at hand. Members of the group are behaving rationally, and the group is behaving as the adult. The adult in everyone is in the foreground. However, the same group can start behaving non-rationally. The focus can shift from task at hand, from rational behavior to something non-rational. The focus can shift from the conscious to the unconscious, from the symbolic to the imaginary. And this state of the group, where the group is not in a rational state, but is in the grip of something unconscious, this state of the group Bion called the basic assumption group. So the group can be in the work group state or in the basic assumption state. Work group or the basic assumption group. These are the two states in which groups are. Our job, of course, is to keep the group as much as possible in the work group state, which is focused on the task at hand, and the group is behaving rationally. And if the group gets into the basic assumptions state, we have to make the group recognize it and bring it to the work group state. 15. What is the work group? Work group is a state of the group where the group is rationally focused on the task at hand. 16. What is the basic assumption group? When the group is acting in a pathological, non-productive way, irrational way, in the grip of some unconscious phenomena, it is in a state that Bion calls is the basic assumptions group. The basic assumption group further can get into any of these three states. All the three are pathological, but to deconstruct the basic assumption group, it can get into any of these three states. First, the state of dependency. In this state, all the group members become dependent on a leader. It's like children dependent on a father. So everyone is not focused on the task. They are completely dependent now on the leader. That state is called state of dependency. It is one of the states of the basic assumption group, and naturally it is irrational and unproductive, pathological. Second state the group can get into is fight and flight, when either the group is ready to fight or to give up. This also is a pathological state, one of the forms of basic assumption group. Third is pairing, where two people in the group, usually the leaders, they start carrying on a conversation between themselves, and the rest of the group becomes a passive audience. It's the replay of the Oedipus, where the parents are talking and all the children are passive. All the three states, dependency, fight, flight, and pairing, are pathological states, and they constitute the basic assumption group. The basic assumption group can go into any of these states. All the three are pathological. 17. What is attack on linking? Why does attack on linking happens? One of the key elements in psychosis Bion found was the break of linkages, because same thinking works by linking one thought to another, one idea to another. If these links are broken, insane thinking, which we call not relevant and coherent, will come up. Linking is what creates or helps create relevance and coherence, which are the hallmarks of same thinking. Bion says that links are broken in the thinking process and psychosis occurs because there are attacks on linking. And the question therefore is, why there are attacks on linking? Bion says the attack on linking is because of envy. That thinking process brings home information about something good outside of ourselves, and that being so unbearable. So much of envy is generated that the envy wants to destroy the object. If the object cannot be destroyed, then the thought process which brings cognition of that object has to be destroyed. In some way or the other, the object has to be destroyed, if not really, then psychologically. And it is this displacement of rage at the service of envy, which first goes to the object in reality and then displaced over to the thinking process, which makes us realize the existence of that envy-provoking object. That envy, the unbearable envy, is what is responsible for attack on linking. So the healing of envy is central to healing the attack of linking, and through it, the healing of psychosis. Not all psychosis is because of envy, but in many cases of psychosis, this would be the situation. I have added to Bion's thought not only envy, but also narcissistic rage can lead to attack of linking. It is rage at the world because the world is not my world. And that rage also can create attacks on linking and thereby lead to psychosis or any cognitive thought defect for that matter. 18. What is maternal reverie in Bionian thinking? Bion's concept of maternal reverie is that mother is so attuned to the baby that with partial or no communication, she is still able to intuit out what the baby wants to communicate in terms of thoughts and feelings. And this state of attunement, once in a lifetime kind of state of empathy. Bion calls this state the state of maternal reverie. This continues usually till 9 months of age. Margaret Mahler also talked about it. Winnicott also talked about it, about using the phrase primary maternal preoccupation. And when that is going on, the maternal reverie is on. Bion's concept, however, is slightly more passive than Winnicott's concept. And Winnicott's concept is more akin to an activity and engagement, whereas Bion's concept is more near to a state of being. It is a state where, in a non-verbal way, thoughts and feelings are communicated. And this is also the state into which the therapist has to go, a state of maternal reverie, so that from the unconscious, what cannot be verbally communicated by the patient gets communicated to the therapist, mostly using projective identification. 19. What is the state Bion wanted the therapist to enter the therapy room with? Bion wanted therapists to enter the therapy room without memory and desire, so that the therapist can really be a blank screen and look at the therapy without any bias whatsoever and provide goalless insights in therapy. It is a very Puritan endeavor to respond to free association with a free floating attention and a free floating interpretation. It is a therapist's free search for the meaning of patients' free associations. It's an ideal state not possible to reach by everyone every time. Sometime most of us can be there. 20. How is Bion viewed within the psychoanalytic community? Unfortunately, Bion and Kohut have been left in a corner. They are not in the mainstream central course. Kohut even more than Bion. Bion still has a wider following than Kohut. But both Kohut and Bion have done very rich, valuable work and they have not been appreciated enough or assimilated enough. Bion is also viewed as a very original thinker, but a very difficult and abstruse thinker. Some people call him one of the most original thinkers in psychoanalysis. Most would agree that the appreciation and assimilation of Bion has not yet rightly been done. It's awaiting its hour. Kierkegaard used to say, only the day after tomorrow belongs to me. Bion can say the same thing about himself. Only the day after tomorrow belongs to me. 21. Can Bion's thoughts be applied for companies in the area of organizational behavior? Of course, they can be applied and they are being applied, but by a very few researchers and consultants who know of Bion, who know of his group work, and who also know about organizational behavior. On a mass popular way or on a scale dimension, the Bion has not been applied because the simple point is very few know about him. Of those who know about him, very few also know about organizational behavior, and his ideas are not easy to understand or assimilate. So, can he be applied? Yes. Should he be applied? Yes. Is he being applied? Very scarcely. Should he be applied more? Yes. Difficulty is in understanding and assimilating him into the area of management, especially organizational behavior. 22. How does Bion stand in conceptual terms vis-a-vis Freud and Klein? Bion never disputed the truth of Freud and Klein. He built ahead of them over the foundation created by them. Freud created the foundation, Klein created the ground floor. Bion was building on top of that. In fact, he had a first-hand experience of both Freudian and Kleinian analysis, and he would have found truth in both, no doubt about it. So there was no question of rejecting Freud or Klein or to get into an or situation. He was into a very clear and situation, not an or situation. Bion, however, brought in new concepts and completely new way of looking at things. And some of the very original and enriching things he brought in were the idea of the grid, the idea of attack on linking, the idea of container and contained, the idea of infinity, the idea of frustration, the idea of O. These are very original ideas he brought in. In a sense, he was enriching the existing rather than do a critique of the existing. Where is Wilfred Bion popular in terms of concepts and therapy? Wilfred Bion is quite popular in some parts of Britain, some parts of Europe, some parts of USA. In India, very few would have heard about Bion or Kohut. Very unfortunate. More and more analysts in India, however, are taking interest in Bion. That's a good part of it. Bion's popularity is increasing very fast because people do see that in deep-seated analysis of very difficult problems, we do come across without any question what Bion came across. And there, Bion's work helps us deeply engage with what we are in front of. 24. Which thinkers have carried forward Bionian thinking? Many of them, most notable are Neville Symington's, Fox, Rickman, Bridger, Bain and Patrick, D. Mare. Many others are still doing great work. I have not put their names here, but they are doing great work. Some of the conferences, especially the ones, I think they are being held in Mexico or Brazil. Very good conferences and very good presentations and very good carrying forward of Bionian thinking and Bionian practice. 25. What are the good resources on Bion? Bion himself is difficult to read like Kohut and Jung. One has to read somebody else on him, get a hang of him, and then come to his original writings. His writings are very dense and abstruse. One can start with the clinical thinking of Wilfred Bion by Neville Symington. Go to A Beam of Intense Darkness by Grotstein. Then go into Bion into original and then to papers on Bion. Online material is available in abundance. Some of it is very simple and very educative. So I would suggest go to online material. If you feel all the books are difficult, then go to online material first, the videos and the reading material, and then go to Clinical Thinking of Wilfred Bion by Symington. With this, we end the chapter on Bion with a quotation from him. The purest form of listening is to listen without memory or desire. Wilfred Bion. Thank you.